The Mississippi sun hung low like a dying ember, staining the horizon in rust and smoke. A carriage creaked along the red dirt road, its wheels groaning under the weight of both wealth and ghosts. Inside sat Elijah Turner, dressed in a dark wool coat and polished boots, garments too fine for the color of his skin in these lands. He had not seen this soil in 15 years, yet every mile closer felt like a noose tightening around his throat. He leaned back against the seat, gloved hands clasped, eyes fixed on the fields stretching endless on both sides. Cotton, white and heavy, shimmered under the heat, a cruel mockery of snow. He could almost hear the rhythm of the picking hands, the thud of the overseer's boots, the whip's song slicing through the wind. No matter how far he had gone, how rich he had become, the South still breathed inside him, and it stank of sweat and sorrow. The driver, a pale man in a brown hat, cleared his throat. "About an hour more to Greenwood, sir," he said, his tone cautious, uncertain whether to call his passenger sir at all. Elijah nodded, his jaw tightening. "Keep steady," he murmured, his voice smooth but heavy, practiced in calm, the kind that hid storms. He reached inside his coat pocket and touched the small silver locket he carried, always a relic of the past. Inside, a faded scrap of fabric, blue once, now dull and frayed. It had been Ruth's, his sister. The last piece of her he'd had when he fled north through swamp and darkness, chased by hounds and firelight. He'd vowed to come back for her. It had taken 15 years, 3 countries, and the price of his soul, but Elijah Turner had returned not as a runaway, but as a man with gold enough to buy what they once stole. The road curved near the river bend. Elijah glimpsed the silhouette of the Harrow's plantation on the horizon, tall columns rising like broken teeth from the earth. The place where his back had bled, where his mother had died in the fields, where Ruth had cried as the master's son dragged her away. His pulse quickened. For a moment he thought of turning back, of letting the past rot behind him, but his mother's voice rose in memory. "Don't let 'em take the last of you, boy. You take something back," he whispered to himself. "I'm taking her home, Mama." The carriage rattled into town by dusk. Greenwood was smaller than he remembered, a string of wooden buildings and smoke-choked chimneys. Yet the air carried the same old arrogance. White men in vests leaned on posts, spitting tobacco as Elijah passed. Their eyes narrowed, their mouths twisted, curiosity mixing with disgust. A Negro in fine clothes was an offense to their order. He ignored them and stepped into the boarding house, removing his hat with quiet grace. The woman behind the desk, a pinched widow with a measuring gaze, froze at the sight of him. "You're looking for work, or?" she asked. "Lodging," Elijah replied, setting a gold coin on the counter. The glint softened her suspicion into greed. "3rd room up the stairs, breakfast at 7. Keep quiet at night." He nodded, climbed the creaking stairs and entered the small room. It smelled of dust and sweat, the wallpaper peeling in brown streaks. He placed his satchel on the bed and drew out his papers, certificates, deeds, proof of business and freedom. They were armor in this place. He'd learned long ago that survival was written in ink as much as blood. From the window, he could see the slave auction yard a few streets away. Lanterns flickered around its wooden platform. Men were already gathering, laughing, drinking, preparing for tomorrow's sale. Somewhere, among those lists of flesh and names, could be Ruth. He felt a tremor in his chest that wasn't fear, but something colder, anticipation sharpened into hate. He lit a candle and sat by the window, staring at the darkness outside. The flame threw long shadows across the room, dancing over his scarred hands. He had built a life in New York, made his fortune through trade, passed among men who shook his hand but never met his eyes. They called him Mr. Turner, yet he knew he'd never stop being the runaway in their gaze. He had carried that burden quietly, saving, waiting, knowing this day would come. Now that it had, the gold in his bag felt like ashes. A knock at the door startled him. He rose, hand instinctively brushing the pistol beneath his coat. "Who's there?" "Stable boys, sir," came a timid voice. "Just checking if you need anything for the horses." Elijah exhaled slowly. "No, boy, that'll be all." As footsteps faded, he sat back down and opened his journal. Its pages were filled with his handwriting, names, places, fragments of plans. The final entry was dated 2 weeks ago. "Find Ruth, buy her freedom, take her north, end the debt." He stared at those words until they blurred, then dipped his pen again and wrote beneath them, "If she is gone, I will bury this land with her memory." The candle guttered. He blew it out and lay down, but sleep never came. Outside, the sounds of the South returned to him, the night insects, the drunken laughter, the faint cry of a whip striking somewhere far off. His chest tightened until he could hardly breathe. He thought of the taste of iron in his mouth, of chains on his wrists, of Ruth's small face pressed to the window as he ran into the dark. When dawn came, he was already awake, his coat buttoned, his eyes hollow but resolute. The sun rose like blood over the town, and the sound of a distant bell marked the beginning of the market day. He stepped out into the street, the morning air thick with wood smoke and the smell of coffee. A wagon rolled past carrying bound men and women, their eyes vacant. One woman looked up, her expression hauntingly familiar for a second enough to twist his gut before she turned away. He followed the road toward the auction yard. The sign above the gate still read, "Allen and Sons Slave Exchange, honest trade since 1812. The irony burned him. Men in hats clustered around the entrance, discussing prices like they were horses. Elijah adjusted his gloves, his every movement precise, deliberate, calculated to remind them he did not belong among their kind, and yet he did. Inside, the air smelled of sweat and tobacco. A man on a platform shouted bids over the clatter of chains. Elijah scanned the list of names tacked to a post, his finger tracing each line. Then he froze. There it was. Ruth, age 26, light brown skin, field hand, property of Kavanaugh estate. His heartbeat roared in his ears. She was alive. After 15 years, she was still here, caged but breathing. He clenched his fist until his knuckles cracked. The past wasn't over. It was waiting for him, just beyond that gate. And Elijah Turner, the escaped slave who returned rich, stepped forward into its jaws. The morning heat rose early, crawling across the wooden fences and dusty streets of Greenwood. The clang of chains and the bellow of the auctioneer's voice echoed down the narrow lanes like the heartbeat of the South itself, rhythmic, cruel, alive with trade. Elijah Turner walked among them with the composure of a man balancing on the edge of a blade. His boots struck the wooden boards as he entered the Allen and Sons auction yard. The familiar smell hit him: sweat, tobacco, old wood, and the sour odor of fear. He paused at the doorway, his eyes sweeping across the crowded hall. Men in fine coats fanned themselves lazily, laughing over whiskey as if this were theater. Women in bonnets whispered behind lace gloves, their gazes darting over the bound bodies on the platform. On the block stood 5 people, stripped to rags, numbered like cattle. A man's voice boomed. "Lot number 27, fine worker, strong back, bred good stock. Who'll start me at 400? The crowd murmured, numbers flying like daggers. Each bid was another reminder that the South's heartbeat ran on blood and money. Elijah forced himself to breathe slow. His hand twitched toward the satchel at his side, heavy with gold. Every coin in that bag was a promise, a weapon he meant to wield with quiet fury. The auctioneer's eyes caught his for a moment, a stout man with slicked hair and a red face. He smirked, half mocking, half intrigued. "Well now," the man said, raising his voice. "Look here, folks. Ain't often we got a colored gentleman dressed finer than a judge in these parts. You here to buy or sell, son?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Elijah met the man's gaze without blinking. "I'm here to buy," he said evenly, his voice carrying through the heat. That silenced them. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow, then chuckled. "Buy, eh? Well, money's money, don't matter what color it comes from, long as it's real." Elijah stepped closer to the platform, his boots thudding against the wood. "I'm looking for one woman," he said, his voice firm. "Name's Ruth. Belongs to the Kavanaugh estate." The crowd stirred. The name Kavanaugh carried weight, the kind that made lesser men lower their eyes. The auctioneer's grin faltered slightly. "Kavanaugh, you say? You'll find his property ain't often sold outside his own hand." Elijah reached into his coat and placed a pouch on the edge of the stage. Gold clinked rich, heavy, undeniable. "He'll sell," Elijah said quietly. "Everyone sells, given the right price." The auctioneer's smile returned, shark-like. "We'll see about that, Mr. Turner," Elijah said. "Mr. Turner," the man repeated, rolling it on his tongue. "You're a bold one. Best speak with Mr. Kavanaugh direct, then. He'll be here by noon for inspection. Seems the world's gone upside down when the buyers are darker than the goods." The crowd laughed again, but uneasily this time. Elijah didn't flinch. He simply turned and walked toward the back row where the unsold were penned behind rough wooden rails. Each step echoed hollowly, like footsteps down a grave corridor. He stopped near the holding pens, his gaze tracing the faces, men and women, young and old, their eyes dull with exhaustion. Some looked away quickly. Others watched him in quiet confusion. He wanted to tell them he wasn't like the others. He wanted to say he had come to free one of their own, but he knew how it would sound impossible, like a story whispered in the dark to keep hope alive. A small girl, no more than 9, caught his eye. Her wrists were bound in rope, her face streaked with dust. When he met her gaze, she lifted her chin with a defiant little gesture, as if daring him to look away. For a moment, he saw Ruth in her, the same spark of pride that refused to die. A guard noticed his lingering glance. "Ain't for sale till Thursday," the man barked, stepping forward. "You here for someone in particular?" Elijah turned to him calmly. "I told the auctioneer, I'm here for Ruth Kavanaugh." The guard spat. "You best talk to the master himself. She's his favorite. Ain't likely to part with her, not for coin nor kindness." Elijah's jaw clenched. Favorite. The word coiled like poison in his gut. He thanked the man curtly and stepped away. Outside, the sunlight was blinding after the gloom of the auction house. Elijah's mind raced. Ruth was alive. The confirmation should have brought relief. But instead it tore open something darker, the image of her still enslaved under the same family name that had beaten their mother to death. He'd dreamt for years of the moment he'd see her again, clean, free, smiling in some northern city. Not this, not chained under a man named Kavanaugh. He crossed the street to the tavern opposite the yard and sat near the window, watching the comings and goings. The barmaid eyed him suspiciously but said nothing when he paid with silver. He sipped the bitter coffee slowly, letting the burn steady his nerves. At noon, a white carriage rolled to a stop outside the auction house. Two men stepped out, one tall, young, and dressed in a light linen suit, his hair slick and golden like sun-washed straw. The other, older, heavy-set, with a cane and a smirk carved permanently into his face. Elijah recognized the arrogance immediately. Kavanaugh, the younger man, swaggered through the gate, his voice loud, his laughter easy. Elijah's fingers tightened around his cup. He remembered that voice, once a boy's, the one who'd laughed when Elijah had been whipped for stealing bread. Now, that same boy was the master. Elijah waited until the men disappeared inside before rising. He straightened his coat, brushed the dust from his sleeves, and walked across the street with the calm precision of a man approaching the gallows. Inside, the air had thickened with expectation. The auctioneer beamed as Kavanaugh entered, shaking hands with the air of a king among subjects. Elijah stepped forward, his shadow falling long across the platform. "Mr. Kavanaugh," he said evenly. The man turned, eyes narrowing as he took in Elijah's clothes, his bearing, his confidence. Recognition flickered faintly, a ghost of the past tugging at memory's edge. "Do I know you, boy?" Kavanaugh asked. Elijah met his gaze without flinching. "You did once. Long ago. I worked these fields before your father died." Kavanaugh laughed, a cold sound. "Then you must have worked well, since you're dressed like a banker now." "I've done well," Elijah replied. "Well enough to buy what's mine." The laughter around them faltered. Even the auctioneer seemed uncertain now. "And what would that be?" Kavanaugh asked, amusement hardening to disdain. "My sister," Elijah said, simply. "Ruth." The word fell between them like a bell toll. For a long second, no one moved. Then Kavanaugh's smile returned slower, crueler. "Ah," he said softly, "so you're the one she used to pray for, the brother who ran." Elijah's face stayed unreadable. "I didn't run. I survived. And I came back to buy her freedom." The silence deepened. Somewhere outside, a crow cawed. Kavanaugh's smirk widened. "You can't buy what isn't for sale," he said, "but I admire your spirit. Maybe I'll show you the woman you think you remember. See what your gold's worth then." He turned to the auctioneer. "Bring her out." Elijah's heart slammed once, hard enough to hurt. The crowd murmured, shifting for a better view. The back door opened, and through the dim passage, two guards appeared, leading a woman by the arms. Her head was bowed, hair falling in dull brown waves around her face. Her dress was grey, torn at the sleeves. The years had carved themselves into her shoulders, but when she lifted her face, Elijah's breath stopped. It was her, Ruth. Her eyes widened. Confusion, disbelief, then something deeper, recognition. She gasped his name under her breath. "Elijah." The crowd laughed, but their voices faded in his ears. All he heard was her voice, trembling through the years. He stepped forward, every instinct in him breaking loose, but the guards blocked his way. Kavanaugh watched him with lazy satisfaction. "You see, Mr. Turner," he drawled, "some things in this world can't be bought. Some debts stay unpaid. Maybe your gold's better spent elsewhere." Elijah stared at his sister, her thin wrists, the bruise on her cheek, the fear in her eyes. Then he looked back at Kavanaugh, his expression carved from stone. "I'll make my offer tomorrow," he said quietly, "and you'll take it." Kavanaugh's smirk flickered just slightly. Elijah turned and walked out, leaving behind the laughter, the heat, the ghosts. Outside, the sunlight seemed colder. His hands trembled, but his eyes burned steady. Tomorrow would decide everything. The night pressed down heavy, thick with the smell of rain and wood smoke. Elijah lay awake in his rented room, staring at the cracked ceiling where shadows crawled like restless ghosts. His sister's face, older, hollowed by time, eyes dimmed but not dead, haunted him with every blink. 15 years of imagining her laughter, her freedom, her salvation, and now she stood before him, chained again, under the same name that had broken their mother. He rose from the bed and crossed to the window. Outside, the town slept in its hypocrisy, lamps glowing in white homes, songs drifting faintly from the tavern, a dog barking somewhere near the river. But beyond it all, Elijah saw the faint orange flicker of torches from the Kavanaugh estate, miles away across the fields. His fists clenched against the windowsill. That glow had once been his horizon, his prison, and his birthplace all at once. He poured a glass of whiskey from the table, but the burn in his throat couldn't drown the taste of memory. And memory, for Elijah Turner, came not in moments but in lashes. He was 15 again. The summer air had been thick, alive with insects and cruelty. He'd worked from dawn to dusk under the overseer's eye, hands blistered, shoulders raw from the strap. His mother had picked cotton beside him, her voice humming old hymns that turned pain into prayer. That day, he'd been caught taking a half-rotted apple from the bin near the smokehouse one meant for pigs. The overseer had dragged him by the neck to the whipping post before anyone could speak. Ruth had screamed, small and wild, until their mother held her down. "Please, he's just a boy," she'd cried. The overseer had grinned. "Then he'll learn while he's young." Elijah remembered the first crack of the whip, how the world went white. The second made his vision swim. The third tore his back open. By the 10th, he wasn't sure he was human anymore. He'd heard Ruth's sobs, muffled by their mother's hand. When it ended, he lay in the dirt, the sky above him burning with sunlight. The overseer's voice drifted over him. "Let that be a lesson, Turner. Blood's hard to break, but it bleeds like any other." Later, in the dark, Ruth had crept to his side with a damp cloth and whispered, "I'll never forget this, Eli, never." He hadn't forgotten either. Elijah blinked back to the present, his hands trembling. He turned away from the window, pressing his palms to his face. The scars on his back, long, pale ridges, ached as if the years had folded on themselves. That pain wasn't gone. It was only buried under silk and gold. He moved to his trunk and opened it slowly. Inside lay the tools of his new life: ledgers, papers, gold coins stacked like trophies. Beside them, wrapped in cloth, was a small wooden cross, the one his mother had carved from a broken fence post before they buried her in the field. He lifted it carefully, holding it up to the candlelight. Her voice came back to him, soft and worn. "Don't let hate eat you, Eli. It's fire, and fire don't care who it burns." But what else was left to burn? The South had already taken everything else. He sat down at the desk and opened his journal again. His handwriting shook slightly as he wrote, "Saw Ruth today. She lives, but not the same. I will pay whatever they ask. But if he mocks me again, if he dares touch her while I stand breathing, God forgive me, for I shall not." He closed the book and stared at the wall. A moth circled the candle, its wings fluttering dangerously close to the flame. For a long moment, Elijah watched it, the fragile thing's obsession with light, its need to touch the fire even though it knew it would die. Then, with a flicker, it caught, burned, and fell. He whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe I'm the moth, after all." The next morning broke grey and humid. Clouds hung low over Greenwood, and the air smelled like iron and storm. Elijah, dressed in silence, white shirt, black vest, gloves tight over his hands. He tucked the wooden cross into his coat pocket and slipped his pistol into the other. As he stepped outside, the world seemed slower. He passed white men tipping hats to one another and women walking under parasols, all pretending the world was right. He wondered if any of them saw the rot beneath the paint. A group of enslaved men were unloading crates near the river dock. One looked up as Elijah passed an older man, grey in his beard, eyes dull but knowing. Their gazes met for half a second, and in that silent exchange, Elijah saw everything: recognition, warning, and a question unspoken: "Why did you come back?" He didn't answer. He kept walking. By the time he reached the main road, thunder was rumbling in the distance. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and rain. The carriage road split near a signpost pointing toward Kavanaugh Plantation 3 miles east. Elijah stared at the path, then at the storm clouds gathering above it. His heart beat once, hard. Then he began to walk. Each step stirred ghosts. He saw flashes of the fields as they used to be, rows of cotton white as bone, the rhythm of hands picking, overseers shouting. He heard his mother's hymn rise faintly above it, that melody she'd hum when pain became too much to speak. Then he saw another memory the night he escaped. Rain had been falling then too, thick and cold. He'd cut his wrists free on a broken nail in the barn, waited until the watchlight turned, then ran. The dogs came quick. He'd splashed through the swamp, mud up to his knees, heart pounding like a drum. A bullet had grazed his shoulder. He still bore the mark. He'd turned once, just once, to see Ruth in the window, her small hand pressed against the glass. He'd almost gone back. But then he'd heard his mother's voice again, this time only in his mind. Run, boy. Run or die here. He had run. For 15 years he'd been running. Until now. By the time he reached the plantation gates, the rain had started. Fine mist turned to steady drops, darkening the dust beneath his boots. The gates were the same tall black iron, crested with the letter C, rusted by time but still proud. A young guard stood beneath the archway, rifle in hand. "What business you got here?" he demanded. Elijah met his eyes coolly. "Tell Mr. Kavanaugh Elijah Turner's come to settle a debt." The guard hesitated, frowning. "You'll have to wait." "I've waited 15 years, Elijah said quietly. "Another minute won't kill me." He stood beneath the rain as the guard disappeared into the yard. His reflection wavered in the puddles, a man dressed like a gentleman, but staring out from the face of a slave. He wondered which version Ruth had seen in the auction house. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the mansion in the distance. Its white pillars gleamed for a heartbeat, then vanished into shadow again. When the guard returned, he simply nodded toward the path. "Mr. Kavanaugh says he'll see you." Elijah stepped forward, boots sinking into the wet soil. The road stretched long and silent toward the house, flanked by the ghosts of the fields he once bled in. The storm gathered above, thunder rolling low like drums of war. As he neared the porch, he whispered under his breath, not prayer, not curse, but something between. "Every chain leaves a mark. Today, I return the favor." Rain slid off Elijah's hat brim as he climbed the steps of the Kavanaugh mansion. The columns loomed like bone-white sentinels, the paint peeling where decades of storms had licked the pride away. Every footstep on the porch thudded like a pulse, steady, deliberate, unforgiving. He paused beneath the doorway, breath clouding in the damp air, and for a brief moment he smelled it again, wet wood, tobacco, and the faint sourness of blood that never fully washed out of these walls. The door opened before he could knock. A man in a black coat stood there, not old, but lined with arrogance. His pale eyes swept Elijah up and down, pausing on the fine boots, the gold chain, the gloved hands. He smiled, thin and sharp. "Elijah Turner," he said. "Well, I'll be damned. The prodigal slave returns." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Mr. Kavanaugh." The master of the house stepped aside with mock politeness. Come in, come in. I'm curious what drives a man back to the place that owned him." Elijah entered. The house smelled of old cedar and whiskey. The floors shone with the same polish he'd once scrubbed into them. Every board creaked a memory. They passed the hall where the portraits hung, Kavanaugh ancestors glaring down from gilded frames, faces smug with inheritance. Elijah's eyes caught one portrait near the end, the late Master Kavanaugh, the father, the man who had whipped him, branded him, and laughed as Ruth screamed for mercy. The younger Kavanaugh noticed his glance and smirked. "Fine likeness, isn't it? My father was a man of discipline. I imagine you remember him well." "I remember every lash," Elijah said quietly. Kavanaugh chuckled. "And yet here you are. Funny how life turns, isn't it?" They entered the parlor. Fire crackled in the hearth, casting orange light on the leather chairs and decanters of brandy. Kavanaugh gestured to one. "Drink?" "No." The master shrugged and poured himself one instead. "You said you came to settle a debt." Elijah nodded. "Your overseer sold my sister last week. Her name's Ruth Turner. I've come to buy her." Kavanaugh swirled his drink. "Ah, yes, the girl. She fetched a fine price at auction. Pretty thing, though a little used up for her age." Elijah's hand twitched, gloved fingers curling tight. "Where is she?" Kavanaugh sipped slowly, savoring the power in silence. Then he said, "In the quarters. But tell me, Turner, what's your interest? Charity, nostalgia, or maybe guilt?" Elijah stepped closer. "I told you. She's my sister." The smile faltered for the first time. "Your sister? You expect me to believe that? That a gentleman from up north, dressed in silk and gold, shares blood with one of my slaves?" He set his glass down and leaned forward. "If I were you, I'd choose my words carefully. Pretending kinship with property is a dangerous fancy around here." Elijah's voice was low, each word deliberate. The danger isn't mine. Kavanaugh studied him for a long moment. The fire snapped. The rain hissed against the window panes. Then, with a small laugh, he leaned back. You've got spirit, I'll give you that. My father would have called it insolence. He rose and walked to the cabinet, drawing out a ledger bound in cracked leather. Let's see. Ruth Turner, age 30, purchased from the Greenwood auction by Kavanaugh Plantation, property record number 42. He tapped the page. Says here she's valued at $800. I assume your pockets are deep enough, Mr. Turner. Elijah reached into his coat and placed a pouch of gold coins on the table. 1,000, cash, for her freedom. Kavanaugh's eyebrows lifted. My, you have done well for yourself. What line of business buys a man like you so much coin? Work, Elijah said simply. The kind your father never understood. Kavanaugh chuckled again, counting the coins with lazy precision. The gold glimmered against his pale fingers. Tell me, Turner, when you escaped, did you dream about this? Walking back into this room, offering money to the son of your master. Does it make you feel powerful? No, Elijah said. It makes me feel sick. Kavanaugh's grin faded. He pushed the pouch back toward Elijah. Keep your gold. She's not for sale. Elijah's voice dropped to a whisper. What did you say? I said. Kavanaugh repeated. She's not for sale. You think you can waltz in here, toss coin on my table and rewrite the order of things? No, Turner. You might wear a gentleman's coat, but you'll always be what you were, a runaway piece of flesh. The words hit like old chains. Elijah's pulse hammered. The air around him thickened until it was hard to breathe. She's my blood, he said through clenched teeth. And she's my property, Kavanaugh replied, smiling thin again. If you want to see her, you'll see her where she belongs. They walked through the corridor in silence, Kavanaugh leading, Elijah following. The rain had turned to a steady downpour, drumming against the roof like a dirge. As they stepped onto the back porch, the smell of mud and wet wood filled the air. The slave quarters lay ahead low, crooked cabins along a narrow path. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, thin and tired. Elijah's boots sank into the puddles with every step. He had walked this same ground barefoot once, his toes cut by stones, his blood mixing with the mud. Now he walked it in leather boots, but the weight on his chest felt the same. Kavanaugh gestured lazily toward one of the cabins. There she is. Through the open doorway, Elijah saw Ruth kneeling by a small fire, scrubbing clothes in a basin. Her hands were red from lye, her shoulders thin beneath the threadbare dress. For a moment he couldn't move. The years fell away. She looked up, sensing him, and their eyes met. Her breath caught. Eli? Kavanaugh smiled. A touching reunion. You two talk while I fetch the overseer. He'll want to make sure you don't forget your manners. He turned and walked off, whistling a tune Elijah recognized, the same his father used to hum after a whipping. Elijah stepped inside. Ruth rose slowly, disbelief warring with hope in her face. It can't be, she whispered. I thought you were dead. He reached for her hand, voice trembling. Not dead, just away too long. Tears filled her eyes. Why'd you come back, Eli? You should have stayed gone. You can't fix this. I came to buy you out, he said, to take you north, to start again. She shook her head. You think he'll let that happen? These men don't sell what reminds them of what they done. We're their ghosts, Eli. He looked into her eyes, the same eyes that had watched him bleed years ago. Then maybe it's time their ghosts learned how to haunt. Thunder cracked outside, rolling through the fields. Kavanaugh's laughter echoed faintly from the distance. Elijah turned toward the door, jaw set. He'd come to buy freedom, but what stood between him and it wasn't the price, it was power. He touched the cross in his pocket, feeling its edges dig into his palm. His mother's words echoed again. Fire don't care who it burns. He exhaled slowly. I didn't come back to beg, he said softly. I came to end it. Outside, lightning flashed. The fields lit for a heartbeat, bright as day. Elijah stepped into the storm, his silhouette framed in white light. The new master had no idea that his reign was about to end not with gold but with fire. Rain lashed against the cabin roof like stones thrown by God himself. Inside, the dim light of the fire trembled across Ruth's face, hollow and lined with exhaustion. Her brother sat opposite her on the dirt floor, hat in his lap, soaked to the bone. The silence between them was heavy, not from lack of words, but from too many years of them buried alive. Ruth stared into the flames. You shouldn't have come back. Elijah's voice was low, steady. And leave you here, after all I promised? She shook her head bitterly. Promises don't hold chains, Eli. You think you can buy me from him? You think gold fixes this? I have more than gold, he said. I have something he can't fight, choice. Her eyes flickered toward him, sharp with fear. You talk dangerous. I learn from dangerous men. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. I came here to take you north, Ruth. Tonight, if I can. You, me freedom. Her hands trembled in her lap. Freedom? She whispered, almost laughing. You don't understand what that word costs here. The last man who said it was hanging from a tree by morning. Elijah's gaze softened. I've seen hangings. I've seen worse. But I've also seen men walk into their graves without ever fighting. I can't be one of them again. Ruth's eyes shimmered in the firelight. She turned away, silent for a long moment. Then she spoke quietly, almost to herself. Do you know what they did to Mama before she died? Elijah froze. No. She took the blame for a broken plow, said it was her fault so they wouldn't beat me. He made her kneel in the yard and pray while they whipped her. 40 lashes. Her back never healed. Elijah's jaw locked, and his hand gripped the wooden cross in his pocket. He'll pay. You can't kill him, Eli, she said sharply. That's not the way. He looked up, eyes glinting. Then what is the way? You tell me. You think God's going to walk down here and unchain us? You think mercy lives in this house? She didn't answer, only stared at the door, the same door her master walked through every night. The fire crackled, spitting sparks. The rain outside deepened to a roar. Somewhere distant, a dog barked, and the sound dragged memories up like ghosts. Years ago, she had been 15 when her brother ran. She had watched him disappear into the storm, his figure swallowed by rain and darkness. That night, their mother had wept not for losing him, but for what she knew would follow. The next morning, the whip sang for hours. Ruth had never forgotten the sound. The overseer's arm moved like a metronome of cruelty, every stroke a punishment for love. They made her watch. You see what happens, he'd said. You remember your brother's sin. She remembered. Every day since, she remembered. And when the old master died, the son had taken his place, smoother voice, cleaner clothes, same poison inside. Elijah, she said finally, pulling him back to the present, he'll never let me go. Even if you kill him, someone else will take his place. The Kavanaughs breed like the weeds they plant. He met her gaze. Then I'll burn the weeds, Ruth, all of them. Her breath caught part fear, part awe. You talk like a man with nothing to lose. I lost everything already. The cabin door creaked open then, and a cold draft swept in. Elijah's hand went to his pistol instinctively, but it was only an old woman, a slave named Mabel, who had served their mother once. Her hair was white now, her eyes cloudy with cataracts. She squinted. Lord have mercy, it is you, Elijah Turner. Elijah stood and bowed his head slightly. Miss Mabel. She shuffled closer, touching his arm as if to test he was real. Thought you long gone to heaven, boy. Your mama would cry to see you stand here again. She'd cry to see what's left of this place, Elijah murmured. Mabel sighed. Ain't nothing left but ghosts. You come to take Ruth? He nodded. I came to free her. The old woman's gaze drifted toward the window, where lightning flashed across the fields. Then you best move careful. The master's men don't sleep light. You'll need more than coin and courage. I've got both, Elijah said. Mabel studied him, then nodded slowly. Then listen close. There's a wagon, comes before dawn, hauling goods to the river. Driver's colored, named Solomon. He owes me a favor. He can take you north if you make it to him alive. Elijah placed a hand on her shoulder. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, child. The devil still runs this house, and he got your scent again. She turned to Ruth. Pack what you can. Be gone before he wakes. Then she slipped back out into the rain, vanishing like a ghost swallowed by stormlight. Ruth stared after her. You see? Even she says it's madness. Maybe madness is the only thing that makes sense now, Elijah replied. He stood, buttoned his coat, and glanced toward the window. The road by the river, that's where we go, before dawn. Ruth looked at him, torn. If they catch us. They won't. And if they do, then I'll do what I came to do. She reached out, grabbing his sleeve. Promise me, Eli don't become like them. He turned to her, rainwater glistening on his face, eyes fierce but soft beneath the storm. I won't, but I won't bow again either. Her hand fell away. The silence that followed was different now, not defeat, but the silence before a storm finds its shape. Later that night, when she thought he'd fallen asleep on the floor beside the dying fire, Ruth sat up quietly. The cabin was dark except for embers. She watched her brother's chest rise and fall steady, unbroken. He had changed, yes, but something inside him still burned too bright for this world. She walked to the small shelf by the window and opened a box. Inside lay a piece of paper creased. yellowed with a name written on it in a careful hand. Ruth Turner. Her freedom paper. A lie she had been told once by the old master's son when she was 16. Sign here, he had said, and you'll have freedom in time. But freedom never came, just another decade of nights she didn't speak of. She touched the paper, eyes glistening. The lie still smelled of ink and arrogance. She crumpled it slowly, feeding it to the fire. The edges curled, blackened, turned to ash. Elijah stirred behind her, waking. Ruth? She wiped her eyes and turned. Just burning what's already dead. He looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. Then with the same. Outside, the wind howled across the fields. The rain began to ease, thinning to a mist. Dawn was still hours away, but the night already felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had shifted. Ruth sat beside her brother again, staring at the dying fire. Her voice came low, almost a whisper. If we don't make it out, promise me you'll make it mean something. Elijah reached into his coat and drew out the wooden cross. He placed it gently into her hands. It already does. The fire popped once, sparks rising like stars. For the first time in years, Ruth smiled. Not with joy, but with something harder, older. The kind of smile that comes only when a person decides they have nothing left to fear. The night was at its darkest when Elijah woke. The fire had died to faint embers, glowing like old memories refusing to fade. The storm had passed, but the world still felt wet and heavy, like the earth itself held its breath. For a moment, Elijah sat still, listening. The cabin was quiet except for the sound of Ruth's slow breathing. He rose carefully, slipping his boots on, and moved to the window. The sky outside was bruised with clouds, pale silver bleeding through their edges. He could see the fields stretching into darkness, the same fields he'd once broken his back in, rows of cotton ghostly in the dim light. Nothing had changed. The fences still leaned, the cabins still sagged, the soil still smelled like sweat and blood. He whispered, more to himself than anyone. 15 years gone, and it's all still here. Behind him, Ruth stirred. You never stop seeing it once. You've lived it. He turned. She was sitting up now, a shawl around her shoulders, eyes heavy but alert. You should rest, he said softly. I haven't really rested since I was born, she murmured. No sense starting now. Elijah gave a faint smile, a flicker of warmth amid the chill. Mabel said the wagon leaves near dawn. We'll need to be at the North Road before first light. Ruth nodded, standing. Then let's not waste darkness. They packed quickly, little to take, less to lose. Ruth gathered a few rags, a comb and a small wooden spoon their mother had once carved. Elijah tucked his pistol into his coat, along with the journal and a pouch of gold. He looked around the cabin once more, the cracked walls, the dirt floor, the smell of lye and smoke, and felt a strange ache. This place had raised them and ruined them both. Ruth paused at the doorway. I used to dream about this moment, she said. Walking out, leaving all this behind. Dreams don't mean much till they hit the ground, Elijah replied. She looked at him, half smiling. You always were the one who had to see to believe. He glanced toward the path outside. Let's go see then. The rain had stopped, but mist rolled low over the fields, soft and white like ghosts wandering home. Their footsteps were muffled by mud. The moon hung low, dull and watchful. Every sound, the creak of a branch, the rustle of grass sounded louder than it should. They moved between the cabins, staying close to the shadows. Now and then a door would crack open, faces peering out, old and young, silent witnesses to what they all longed for but few dared attempt. A boy whispered hoarsely, Where you going, Miss Ruth? She turned, crouched, and touched his cheek. Somewhere the sky don't have masters. The boy's eyes widened. You gonna come back? Ruth's throat tightened. If the wind carries me right. Elijah gently took her arm. We can't linger. They slipped past the last of the cabins, across the open patch of field that led to the old oak line. The ground there was slick and soft. Elijah's boots left deep prints. His breath came steady but quick. The world felt suspended, as if dawn were waiting for them to decide whether it should come at all. Halfway to the fence line, Ruth stopped. Her gaze had turned to the manor in the distance, the great white house crouched on the hill, dark now, windows like closed eyes. Elijah, she whispered, you said you came back for me, but that's not all, is it? He hesitated. I came for you first. And second? His jaw worked. To finish it. Her eyes glimmered faintly in the mist. Finish what? The fire Mama warned me about, he said quietly. The one I've carried too long. She stared at him, realization dawning slow as dawn itself. You mean to burn it? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Ruth's breath shuddered. You think fire's gonna fix what's been done? No, he said. But it'll make sure it don't happen again, not here. She shook her head, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. You'll die, Eli. Maybe, but I'd rather die ending something than live knowing it still breathes. A long silence stretched between them, a silence older than both of them, filled with chains and hymns and unmarked graves. Finally, she said, if you're going to do it after we're gone. Don't make me watch the past burn. He nodded slowly. You have my word. They resumed walking. Neither spoke again. At the edge of the field stood the old split-rail fence. Beyond it, the trees thickened the start of the river road. A faint glow touched the horizon, the first fragile breath of dawn. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats. Elijah froze. They were distant, but closing fast. He pushed Ruth behind a cluster of brush. Stay down. A moment later, torchlight flickered through the mist. Two riders emerged from the dark, rifles across their laps. Overseers, the Kavanaugh hounds. Someone seen movement near the quarters, one muttered. The master wants all eyes open. The other spat tobacco. If it's that Turner bastard, he won't make it a mile. Ruth's hand clamped over Elijah's arm, trembling. He held her wrist gently. Breathe, he mouthed. The riders passed slow, their torches painting the mist orange. Elijah didn't move until their silhouettes were swallowed again by the dark. Only then did he exhale. Ruth whispered, They're hunting you. Then let's not let them catch the scent. They crossed the fence and followed the river road, moving low and fast. The sky was beginning to shift, now streaks of violet and dull gold brushing the clouds. The air grew colder. Each breath felt sharper, more urgent. They reached the bend in the road where the trees opened to a small clearing. A wagon stood there, hitched to a tired-looking mule. A man sat slouched in the driver's seat, hat tipped low. Elijah called softly, Solomon? The man turned, wary. His face came into the faint light, middle-aged, black skin glistening with sweat, eyes lined with suspicion and fatigue. Who's asking? Mabel sent us, Elijah said. She said you could help. The man's shoulders relaxed slightly. Mabel still breathin'? Lord, I owe that woman more than I can pay. He looked at them both. You the ones running? Elijah nodded. We need to reach the river crossing. Solomon eyed them up and down. Ain't no easy path. Patrol's thick since last week. They hang folks for less than a whisper of runaway talk. We'll take that chance, Elijah said. Solomon looked to Ruth, then back at him. You sure you know what you're doing, brother? Elijah's voice came steady. I've known since the day I left this place. The driver hesitated, then gestured. Get in. I can get you close to the ferry road, but after that you on your own. They climbed into the wagon, ducking low under the tarp. The mule grunted as the wheels began to roll. The sound of creaking wood and crunching gravel filled the silence. Ruth leaned against her brother, whispering, We might just make it. Elijah didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the plantation fading behind them, the house a pale smudge in the dawn. Smoke from the chimney curled upward, thin, lazy, mocking. After a long while, Solomon spoke without turning. You ever been free before, boy? Elijah's jaw clenched. Once, for a while. Then you know it ain't easy. Freedom's heavier than chains sometimes. You carry it, it don't carry you. Elijah nodded slowly. Then I'll learn to bear the weight. The wagon bumped along the road, the forest thickening around them. Birds were waking now, their calls cutting through the thinning mist. The sky glowed pale gold through the branches. For a brief moment, Ruth closed her eyes and let the cool wind touch her face. She whispered, It smells different out here, like the air's cleaner. Elijah turned to her, a faint smile breaking through the hardness. That's what hope smells like. She looked at him, and for the first time she believed it might be true. But behind them, far back on the hill, a single light flared in the mansion window. A shape moved within, pacing, watching, and though dawn had come, the darkness wasn't done with them yet. The wagon rolled on through the pale morning, its wheels creaking against the soaked road. The forest on either side seemed to close in tighter, with each turn gnarled branches like ribs of the earth, dripping dew, whispering secrets of the past. Elijah sat hunched near the rear, his eyes fixed on the thin smoke rising in the distance. It came from the direction of the plantation, faint yet unmistakable. Even from miles away, the sight gnawed at him like a memory refusing burial. Ruth dozed beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. The movement of the wagon rocked her in uneven rhythm, her breath shallow but calm. Elijah studied her face, the faint scars near her temple, the lines of exhaustion etched too early. She had survived. Yes, but survival had its own price. Solomon cracked the reins lightly. "We'll hit the main road soon," he muttered, his voice gravelly. "From there, it's half a day's ride to the crossing if we don't run into dogs." Elijah nodded. His fingers brushed the pistol hidden in his coat pocket, more out of habit than intent. He wasn't a man used to peace. Peace made him anxious. For a long time, no one spoke. The forest was filled with the sound of insects and the far-off cry of crows. Then Solomon broke the silence. "You came back from the north, didn't you?" Elijah met his eyes. "I did. Most who get out don't ever look back," Solomon said, shaking his head. "Takes a certain kind of fool to return to the place that broke him." Elijah's lips curved faintly. "Maybe I am that kind." The driver studied him, then looked ahead again. "Fools start revolutions sometimes." Elijah didn't reply, but in his chest, something stirred a spark that had never really gone out. By noon they reached the old pine bridge, half-rotted and slick with moss. The wagon creaked dangerously as it crossed. Below, the river glimmered brown and restless. When they reached the far side, Solomon slowed the mule and pointed to a thicket of brush ahead. "I can't go past that ridge," he said. "Patrol's too thick near the ferry road. You'll have to walk the rest." Elijah helped Ruth down from the wagon. She stretched stiffly, her legs trembling from the long ride. Solomon leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You got coin?" Elijah handed him a small pouch of gold dust. "For the road, and for Mabel." Solomon looked surprised, then nodded slowly. "She always said you'd come back for something bigger than yourself. Guess she was right." "She usually was," Elijah said with a faint, sorrowful smile. The older man tipped his hat. "May the Lord walk with you both," Ruth murmured softly, "and with you." The wagon turned and disappeared back down the road, the sound of its wheels fading into the trees. Silence settled thick, uneasy, almost sacred. They began walking, following the narrow trail that wound toward the river. The air was heavy, the smell of wet earth mixing with pine. Ruth walked slightly ahead, clutching the wooden spoon their mother had carved years ago. It had survived everything: hunger, beatings, winter nights. It was the last piece of home she hadn't lost. "Elijah," she said after a while, "when you left back then, did you ever think you'd see this place again?" He shook his head. "Every day I swore I wouldn't. But swearing don't mean much to a man who can't sleep." She nodded slowly, her eyes downcast. "When they took me back after you ran, I used to dream you'd come for me. I stopped after a few years." He winced at that. "I should have come sooner." "You couldn't," she said quietly. "You were still chained, just to different masters." Elijah stopped walking. The words hit him harder than he expected. "What you mean?" She turned, eyes wet but calm. "You think freedom's just about walking where you please? You still carry that anger, Eli, still letting them live rent-free in your chest. That's another kind of chain." He looked at her, jaw tightening. "Then maybe burning this place is how I break it." Ruth's gaze held him a moment, full of sorrow. "Or maybe it's how you feed it." The silence that followed was thick with years they could never reclaim. They reached a clearing overlooking the river, wide, brown, moving fast. Across the water, faint plumes of smoke rose from another settlement. The ferry dock was a mile south, but Elijah wasn't looking that way. His eyes were fixed north, toward the white speck of the manor visible through the haze. He said nothing, just stared. Ruth sighed. "You're still going back, aren't you?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low, steady. "I can't leave it standing, Ruth. Not after what I saw. Not after what they did to you." Her voice broke. "And if you die there, what will it change?" He looked at her then, eyes like cold steel. "It'll change me." Ruth pressed her lips together, shaking her head. "You're not that boy they beat anymore. You don't owe them your blood." "I owe the dead their peace," he said softly. She reached out, gripping his coat. "You owe the living your life." Their eyes locked, years of pain, love, and unspoken words burning between them. Then Elijah gently took her hand and kissed her forehead. "If I don't come back by sunrise, follow the river north. There's a man named Levi in Charleston. Tell him I sent you." Ruth's voice trembled. "Don't make me bury you twice." He smiled faintly, a sad, tired smile. "You won't need to." And before she could speak again, he turned and started back through the trees. The path to the plantation was long and silent. Every step felt heavier than the last. The mist had lifted, and the sun hung low, gold and cruel. Elijah's heart beat like a drum in his chest. He moved through the fields like a shadow, the smell of scorched wood growing stronger. He could see the manor clearly now, the same porch where he'd once been whipped, the same columns he'd scrubbed with bloodied hands. His boots sank into the same soil that had soaked up so many tears. By the time he reached the edge of the yard, The world seemed to hold its breath. A few overseers lingered near the barn, laughing unaware. Elijah kept to the shadows, circling toward the storehouse. The air inside was thick with dry hay and kerosene. He took out the matchbook. His hand didn't shake. "This is for her," he whispered. "For all of them." The match struck. Flame bloomed small, trembling, hungry. It caught the edge of the hay, then spread fast, curling upward like a living thing set free. Within moments the storehouse roared alive, light spilling through the cracks like dawn itself. Shouts broke out. Overseers ran toward the blaze, confusion turning to panic. Elijah stepped into the open yard, pistol drawn. One of the men saw him, eyes widening in recognition. "You, it's him, the Turner boy." Elijah fired once. The man fell. The others scattered. Fire climbed the barn walls, leaping from beam to beam. The sky filled with black smoke and cinders. Elijah moved toward the house. His chest heaved, his face slick with sweat and soot. The front door was open, wind pulling the flames toward it like breath to a wound. Inside, portraits burned. Velvet drapes turned to ash. The grand staircase glowed orange, cracking. Every room he passed smelled like ghosts. At the top of the stairs he paused. There was the master's study, the same room where chains once hung by the window, polished clean after every beating. Elijah stared at the desk, at the gold-framed photograph of the man who'd owned him. He took the frame, stared at it for a long second, then hurled it into the fire. "I'm the master now," he said, voice steady, almost calm. The ceiling groaned. Flames burst through the rafters. The house began to collapse inward, a giant exhale of centuries. Elijah stood in the middle of it, eyes reflecting the inferno. The heat licked at his coat. The smoke stung his lungs, but he didn't move, not yet. Only when the roof cracked open and the night sky poured in did he finally step outside. Behind him, the manor that had ruled so many lives came crashing down, a burning skeleton against the horizon. He watched until nothing was left but flame and ruin. Then, and only then, did Elijah turn toward the river. The fire within him was finally quiet. The sky over the plantation bled gray and orange, a bruise of smoke spreading across the dawn. From miles away, the flames were still visible, a jagged crown of fire tearing at the horizon. Ruth watched from the ridge above the river, hands trembling against her shawl. The air reeked of ash and wet earth. "Elijah," she whispered, voice cracking. The wind carried faint echoes, a distant crack, the wail of collapsing wood. She wanted to run back, to scream his name until the trees gave him back. But something deeper, older, told her not to. Fire like that didn't leave much behind. Ruth sank to her knees, clutching the wooden spoon. Her breath came sharp and uneven. The world felt too still, as if even God was watching and refusing to interfere. She whispered the old prayer their mother used to hum, broken words, half memory, half hope. The river answered with a low murmur, carrying the sound away. Behind her, footsteps rustled. She spun, heart pounding, until she saw Solomon step from the trees, hat in hand, sweat streaking his soot-stained face. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, looking toward the smoke. "Didn't think he'd really do it." Ruth's throat tightened. "You saw him?" Solomon nodded slowly. "From the hill. He lit that whole place up like Judgment Day, walked right into the fire and never looked back." Ruth pressed her lips together, her chest trembling. "And now?" "I went back when the roof came down," Solomon said quietly. "Didn't find no body." Her eyes snapped up. "No body?" He shrugged. Could mean he burned with it. Could mean he walked away. Ruth rose to her feet, wiping her tears roughly. "Then, I'll wait." Solomon gave her a long look, the kind of look men give to those who've already buried too much. "You ain't safe waiting here. Patrols will come soon as they see that blaze. You need to cross." Ruth glanced toward the water, wide and wild, its surface rippling gold beneath the light of a new morning. "The ferry? Gone," Solomon said. "Probably burned too. But the river don't care for fences. If you can keep your feet, it'll carry you." She looked back at the smoke again. "He said he'd come by sunrise." Solomon sighed. "Then we'll give him till the sun breaks clean." They built a small fire near the water, careful and low. The sky brightened, streaks of pink brushing through the gray. Ruth sat close to the flames, silent, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every sound made her flinch, a crack of twig, a bird's call, the river's constant rush. Solomon waited a few yards away, keeping watch, a rusted pistol in his lap. After a long time, he said softly, "He your kin?" Ruth nodded. "My brother." Solomon whistled low. "That explains the fire in him." She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Mama used to say he was born with lightning in his blood." never could hold still. Solomon chuckled, then frowned toward the distance. If he made it out, he'll come this way. But if he didn't, Ruth interrupted, voice firm. He made it out. Solomon looked at her, then nodded once. Faith's a hard thing to kill. They waited. Minutes stretched into hours. The smoke from the plantation thinned, fading into the clouds. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of charred wood and something metallic. At last, Ruth stood. I can't wait no more. Solomon rose too. You sure? Her eyes glistened. He'd want me to keep walking. She wrapped the spoon in her shawl, took a deep breath, and stepped into the river. The water was cold, biting, alive. It pulled at her skirt, lapped at her knees, then her waist. Solomon followed, guiding her across, his grip steady. Halfway through, the current surged strong. Ruth gasped, nearly losing balance. Solomon tightened his hold. Keep your eyes on the far side, he said. Don't look back. She nodded, forcing her legs to move. The current roared louder, hungry. And then a voice. Ruth! She froze. The name cut through the air like thunder. Her head whipped around. On the far bank behind them, through the haze and ash, a figure stumbled into view. Elijah. His coat was burned at the edges, face streaked with soot, one arm pressed against his side, but he was alive. Ruth screamed his name. The sound broke into the morning, raw and pure. He waved weakly, limping toward the water. Go, don't stop for me. She shook her head violently. No, you're coming. Elijah stumbled again, nearly falling to his knees. Smoke clung to him like a second skin. Behind him, faint shouts echoed riders in the distance. Solomon swore, We gotta move, girl. But Ruth was already turning back, fighting the current. The water tore at her legs, dragging her sideways. Elijah! He saw her, and for a moment, something like both love and fury crossed his face. Ruth, he shouted. Don't come back, please don't. But she didn't stop. The current caught her full. Solomon lunged, grabbing her arm, but her shawl slipped from his grip. She spun, her head dipping beneath the surface. Elijah! Without thinking, he waded in. The cold bit into his lungs, but he pushed forward, one arm still clutching his side. The water was deeper than he remembered, the current faster. Each step felt heavier. He caught a glimpse of her, her hand breaking the surface, reaching. He lunged, caught it, and pulled. The force nearly tore his shoulder, but he held on. Together they burst upward, gasping, coughing river water. Solomon shouted from the far bank, This way! Come on! They fought toward him, struggling against the current. The river seemed determined to claim them both. By the time they reached the shallows, Elijah's strength was nearly gone. Solomon hauled them up, coughing, soaked, trembling. Ruth clung to her brother, sobbing. I thought you were gone. Elijah smiled weakly, eyes half closed. Almost was. She touched his face, her fingers shaking. You burned it, didn't you? He nodded once. Every board, every memory. Solomon glanced back toward the trees. We gotta go. They'll be here soon. Elijah's knees buckled. He tried to stand, but pain shot through him. Solomon threw one of his arms over his shoulder. Come on, brother. You didn't crawl out of hell just to die by a river. Ruth followed close, clutching Elijah's coat as they stumbled into the woods. The sound of horses grew behind them, distant, but coming fast. They walked until the smoke was nothing but a shadow on the wind. The forest grew thick again, sunlight spilling through the leaves in golden shards. Elijah's breath came shallow, his steps slowing. Ruth looked at him anxiously. You need rest. He shook his head. We don't stop till we reach the ridge. But by the time they reached it, his body gave out. He sank against a fallen log, chest heaving, one hand pressed over a dark stain spreading beneath his coat. Ruth's eyes widened. You're bleeding. It's nothing, he rasped. Just a reminder. Solomon knelt, tearing his sleeve to wrap the wound. You're lucky the shot didn't catch bone. Elijah winced, then looked up through the trees. The sunlight was soft now, late afternoon gold. It's strange, he murmured, how quiet it feels. Like the world forgot to hate. Ruth's eyes glistened. You didn't have to come back for me. Yes, I did. His voice was faint but steady. You're the only piece of home I ever wanted to save. Tears streaked her face. And now? He smiled weakly. Now it's your turn to live for both of us. She gripped his hand tight. Don't you say that. But his gaze drifted toward the horizon. Look, Ruth, the river. It's shining. She turned. The water below glowed gold and red light dancing across the surface like fire reborn. Elijah, she whispered, stay with me. He exhaled slowly, eyes softening. I am. The sun slipped behind the trees. The forest dimmed, and the river kept moving, carrying the ashes of everything they'd lost and everything they'd become. The next dawn rose thin and pale, the kind of light that didn't warm, only revealed. Mist clung to the trees like breath held too long, and the forest around them seemed endless. Solomon led the way, his steps heavy but sure, scanning every direction. Behind him, Ruth half-carried Elijah, his weight pressed against her shoulder. He was fading. His face had gone grey, his breath uneven. The wound on his side bled slow but steady through the cloth, yet he never complained. Every step seemed to come from something deeper than strength, from sheer refusal. They paused by a stream to drink. Ruth knelt beside him, cupping water in her hands to his lips. He sipped weakly, his eyes drifting to the water's surface, his reflection ghostly, unrecognizable. Funny, he murmured. I used to dream of seeing my face in a clean stream. Always thought it'd look like freedom. Ruth brushed his hair from his brow, her hands shaking. You are free, Eli. You made it. He gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Freedom don't feel like I thought it would. Solomon crouched nearby, scanning the tree line. It don't for most folk, but it's still worth the wait. Elijah's gaze lingered on the man. You been free long? 7 years. Solomon, said voice low. Bought it with my own blood too. Ain't a soul out here without scars to pay for theirs. Elijah nodded faintly. Then maybe freedom's just the space between wounds. Ruth's hand tightened on his arm. Don't talk like that. He looked at her gently. Like what? Like you're already gone. I ain't gone, he whispered. Not yet. But when he tried to stand, his knees buckled. Ruth caught him before he fell, her voice breaking. You need a doctor. Solomon shook his head grimly. Closest town's 2 days away, maybe more. And every road between here and there's watching for folk like us. Ruth turned desperate eyes on him. There must be somewhere. Solomon hesitated. There's a Quaker farm near Marlow Bend. They take in runaways. Might be they'll help. Then we go there, Ruth said, determination cutting through her fear. Elijah's hand found hers. Ruth, no. Yes, she said sharply. You carried me this far, now I carry you. He wanted to argue, but her tone left no room. He just closed his eyes, exhausted. By midday, the forest thinned into open country, wide meadows, scattered with scrub and old stone walls. The air smelled cleaner, drier, but danger lay in the open. They moved fast, staying low along the ridge. Every sound, a distant bird, a snapping branch, made Ruth flinch. Elijah's steps grew slower, his head dipping forward. Solomon finally stopped. We need cover. They found an old shed, half collapsed near a thicket of blackberry bushes. Inside it smelled of dust and hay. Sunlight speared through the cracks in thin beams. Ruth eased Elijah down onto a pile of old burlap. His face was ashen now. She pressed her hand against his chest, still moving but faint. Solomon tore open the wound, dressing, grimacing. Bullets lodged deep. Infection setting in. Can you get it out? Ruth asked. Not without killing him faster, he said quietly. He needs clean tools, rest, medicine. She bit her lip hard. Then he'll have all of them when we reach that farm. Solomon met her eyes. You sure you can make it in time? Ruth's jaw tightened. I don't have a choice. Hours passed. Outside, the light dimmed to a copper dusk. The sound of crickets filled the stillness. Ruth sat beside Elijah, dabbing his forehead with water. He stirred once, mumbling something too faint to hear. She leaned close. What is it, Eli? His lips barely moved. You still got that spoon. She smiled through her tears and showed it. Always. He chuckled weakly. Mama carved that when I was just big enough to steal cornbread. Said one day I'd eat from it as a free man. You did, she whispered. We both did. He turned his head toward her. Don't let this place take you again. No matter what happens, you keep going. Her voice broke. Don't talk like you're leaving me. He gave her that same small, knowing smile. Ain't leaving. Just rest in my feet a while. Solomon stood in the doorway, watching silently a man who'd buried too many to believe in miracles, but still hoping for one more. That night, the rain came, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the roof. The wind moaned through the cracks, carrying the scent of wet soil and pine. Ruth stayed awake, whispering to Elijah stories from when they were children, of fireflies and songs their mother used to hum. He drifted in and out, caught between worlds. Once, his hand reached for hers. Ruth, he breathed, if the fire took me, would it still burn? She shook her head fiercely. You're not the fire. You're the light that came after. Outside, thunder rolled low. Solomon moved to the entrance, scanning the darkness. He could hear distant hooves again, faint, but there. The patrols hadn't given up. He turned to her. "We can't stay here long." Ruth's eyes filled with dread. "He can't move." "I know, but if they find us—" She cut him off. "Then I'll fight." Solomon looked at her a long moment. "You sound just like him." She lifted her chin. "I am him." The rain stopped by dawn. Mist hung over the field, thick and low. Elijah's breathing was shallow now, each exhale a whisper. Ruth knelt beside him, clutching his hand. He opened his eyes slowly, as if the light itself hurt. "You remember the song Mama used to sing?" Ruth nodded through tears. "Always." "Sing it," he whispered. "For me." She began softly, her voice trembling but pure, a tune older than both of them, a hymn of crossing rivers and finding rest. The notes floated through the shed, filling the space with something sacred. When the song ended, he exhaled. "That's freedom," he murmured, and then his chest stilled. Ruth froze. Her breath hitched. "Eli?" No answer. She pressed her forehead to his, her tears falling onto his skin. The world outside was waking birds calling, wind stirring the trees, but in that shed, time had stopped. Solomon stepped forward, hat in hand, voice quiet. "He's gone, Ruth." She didn't move. "No." "Ruth." She looked up, eyes hollow, her brother's hand still in hers. "He burned their house, Solomon, but it was the world that burned him." The older man knelt beside her. "Sometimes the fire we start don't burn out easy, but what he did, it'll light the way for more than just us." She closed Elijah's eyes gently, whispering, "Then let it." They buried him beneath the tallest pine near the river ridge. Ruth carved his name into a flat stone with the spoon-shaky letters, but true. Elijah Turner, freed by fire. She stood there long after Solomon finished covering the grave, staring at the mound of fresh earth. The sun broke through the clouds just then, thin beams catching the wet leaves and the rippling water beyond. Ruth whispered, "You kept your promise. You came back for me." Then she took his pistol, his journal, and the spoon, her new relics of both pain and memory, and tucked them into her satchel. When she turned, Solomon was waiting. "The farm's west. We can reach it by nightfall if we keep pace." Ruth nodded, but her eyes lingered on the grave one last time. "Goodbye, Eli," she said softly. "I'll carry the fire now." And with that, she walked away, shoulders straight, steps steady, never once looking back. Behind her, the wind picked up, sweeping across the clearing. It rustled the pine branches above Elijah's grave, and for a moment, it sounded like a sigh or a song. The road west wound like a scar through the land, pale dirt, rutted and hard from wagon wheels. Ruth walked in silence beside Solomon, the satchel heavy against her hip. Inside it, Elijah's journal knocked softly against the pistol with each step. The spoon rested at the bottom, wrapped in cloth. She hadn't spoken since dawn. Solomon didn't press her. He understood that kind of silence, the kind that held more words than any mouth could bear. The air smelled of smoke from distant farms, the kind that clings to grief. By mid-morning, the hills began to rise, and the trees thickened again. A faint haze hung over the valley ahead, the kind that comes after rain and sorrow. Solomon stopped at the crest and pointed toward a cluster of trees near the bend of a river. "There," he said, "the Quaker farm's just beyond that grove. Once you cross the river, you'll see a white barn with a red roof. They keep watch for folk like us." Ruth shaded her eyes. "And you?" "I'll see you safe to the edge," he said simply. "Then I turned south." She frowned. "Why south?" "There's another group that needs leading. Family out near Franklin. Word travels fast when someone burns down a plantation. Patrols be thicker now. Got to move before they start hanging folk for rumors." Ruth nodded slowly. "Then we best hurry." They descended toward the river, the sound of water growing stronger, wide and swift, swollen from the storm. It wasn't deep, but the current looked mean. At the bank, Ruth hesitated. "Feels like we've been crossing rivers forever." Solomon gave a faint smile. "Maybe we have. But this one's different. Other side of this, you're done running." She glanced at the water. "You ever stop running?" His eyes hardened, though not unkindly. "Ain't sure I'd know how." They waded in. The water was freezing, biting at her ankles, then her knees. It pulled hard, dragging at her skirt, but she kept her eyes forward. Halfway across, she stumbled on a rock slick with moss. Solomon caught her arm. "You're almost there," he said. She nodded, teeth clenched, and pushed forward. The current roared in her ears, white foam swirling. By the time they reached the far bank, Ruth was shivering. Solomon helped her up, both soaked to the bone. Ahead, Through the trees, she saw it a small white farmhouse with a red-roofed barn, smoke curling gently from the chimney. A woman stood at the fence, apron dusted with flour, grey hair pulled tight under a bonnet. She spotted them and froze. Then, seeing the satchel, the torn clothes, the haunted look in Ruth's eyes, she understood. The woman hurried forward. "Come in, child. You look half drowned." Ruth hesitated, still gripping the satchel strap. We need help." "You'll have it," the woman said, glancing at Solomon. "Both of you." Solomon shook his head. "Just her. I'm moving on." The woman studied him. "You've the look of one who's carried too many miles. You could rest here too." He gave a small, sad smile. "Rest ain't something folk like me get easy." Ruth turned to him, sudden panic in her eyes. "You're leaving?" "Got to," he said. "But you'll be safe here." She swallowed hard. "I don't even know how to thank you." He shook his head. "You already did. You kept walking." She took his hand, holding it tightly. "You ever come north again, find me, wherever I am." He nodded once. "I will." Then, without another word, he turned and vanished back down the trail, a shadow fading into the trees. The Quaker woman, whose name was Mrs. Whitfield, led Ruth inside. The warmth hit like a shock fire crackling, bread baking. It felt almost cruel after so much cold. "Sit by the fire," the woman said. "I'll fetch you a blanket." Ruth obeyed, lowering herself to the hearth. Her hands trembled as she held them toward the flames. The smell of burning wood filled the small room, and for a moment she was back in that mansion, watching fire devour everything. Her breath caught, heart pounding. Mrs. Whitfield returned and draped a quilt over her shoulders. "You're safe now," she said softly, but the words didn't land. Safe, what did that even mean anymore? The woman studied her quietly. "You lost someone." Ruth's throat tightened. "My brother." Mrs. Whitfield's expression softened. "Then may peace find him. And you." Ruth stared into the fire, voice low. He found his peace in the flames. That night, when the house slept and the fire burned low, Ruth sat alone at the table. She laid Elijah's journal before her and opened it. His handwriting was strong at first, then faltering lines about freedom, revenge, redemption. On the last page, smeared with dried blood, he'd written, "If I do not live to see her free, let her know that every fire I lit was for her." Her hand covered her mouth. The sob that came out was small but sharp, the kind that tears the soul on its way out. When she could breathe again, she reached for the pistol. It felt cold and heavy, an artifact from another world. She placed it beside the journal and unwrapped the spoon. The carved initials E.T. glowed faintly in the lamplight. She whispered, "You did it, Eli. You brought me back not with gold, but with fire." Days passed. Ruth stayed on the farm, helping in the kitchen, mending clothes, tending to the garden. The world outside was changing, whispers of war, of men talking about freedom not as a crime but as a right. Yet she felt none of it reaching her. One morning, she rose before dawn and walked back to the riverbank. The mist lay thick, the water calm. She carried Elijah's journal and the spoon. She sat at the edge, fingers tracing the leather cover. "I used to think freedom meant running," she said softly. "Then I thought it meant revenge. Now I think maybe it just means remembering." She opened the journal one last time, tore out the last page, the one with his blood, and folded it carefully. Then she set the rest adrift. The river caught it gently, pulling it downstream. The pages fanned open, soaking, then slowly sank. The ink bled away like ghosts. Ruth closed her eyes. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. For a moment, she could almost hear Elijah's voice, low, steady, teasing her the way he used to when they were children. "Keep walking, Ruth." She smiled faintly. "I will." Months later, word came through travelers that the Turner plantation was nothing but ash. The land lay barren, the house gone, the name cursed. But in nearby towns, people whispered of a man who'd returned rich and set it all ablaze, freeing what he could before the fire took him. Some said he was a ghost. Others said he still walked the woods near the river, watching over those who crossed. Ruth never corrected them. She stayed at the Quaker farm until the first frost of the next winter. Then one morning, she packed her satchel, just the spoon and the pistol, and left without a word. No one knew where she went. Some said she headed north to Canada, others that she joined the Union camps later, tending to wounded men. But there were a few who swore they saw her years later, a black woman standing at the banks of a river near Marlow Bend, staring at the water like she was waiting for someone to cross. The sun dipped low that day, turning the sky to gold. Ruth stood barefoot in the shallows, her reflection rippling. She looked older, stronger, not free of grief, but shaped by it. She knelt and dipped the spoon into the river, letting the water run over it. Then she whispered, "For every chain you broke, Eli, for every fire that burned right." When she stood again, she looked west. Somewhere beyond that horizon, other men and women were still running, still hiding, still hoping. She thought of them and of what her brother had said. Freedom's just the space between wounds. Maybe so. But for the first time she felt that space widening. Ruth turned and walked back into the trees, her figure fading with the light. The river flowed on, endless and indifferent, carrying with it the last ashes of the past and, perhaps, the first breath of something like peace.